So on Thursday, John Gallagher was talking to media, and the subject of his wife's pregnancy and looming due date came up, and he shared a wish, and I guess this would obviously work out best for maybe everybody concerned. I haven't consulted with his wife, but the idea that if she gives birth during this upcoming international break, perhaps he won't miss any time and will be able to play in the Toronto game on September 14th. The concern with just where the timing is, of course, is that the baby might hang around for a while, and then he would be with his wife in Austin for that match while the rest of the team is in Toronto. And that's totally understandable. He talked about family coming first and all that, but he said something at the press conference. He said specifically, we had international break next week, so that would be ideal. We're looking up all the magic remedies to try to get her going, which is a way to say that. So I did a little bit of research. First of all, what's your familiarity on these kind of magic remedies that might induce labor?
I've never been party to trying to engage in one personally, but I know that now that people's attention is on the fact that depending on when that actual delivery date is could affect when John is available to play for the team. A lot of people
Mhm.
within the fan base suddenly very interested in these things and Googling things.
I did a little research. There's a lot of different sites. I looked at the Cleveland Clinic, which is generally pretty good. So, again, there's no kind of surefire food that triggers it. Certainly, there are certain activities that may or may not help, but there's not really anything scientifically one way or the other that says, yes, this will definitively do it or not do it. Foods include, and again, there are some that are definitely ones that you should avoid and are bad ideas, but certainly ones that wouldn't hurt, according to Cleveland Clinic, include pineapple, dates, and red raspberry leaf tea, whatever that might be. Spicy foods are also advised against, even though that comes up as a recommendation. I think both of us have this in common. We are generally pro spicy foods. And even though it might be a bad idea for reasons, it's also a good idea, even when it's a bad idea.
Yeah, they've got a few days yet to change things up. I feel like people should just look to the skies, make a burnt offering or something. I think the old school superstitious stuff is maybe just as useful for people to focus on than hoping that she's suddenly shifting diet so that they can make something happen. Gallagher himself mentioned that they were looking at what they could do to go ahead and induce things and get things going. She was on Thursday. She's close enough to the expected due date that it feels like they may go the more conventional route, but I think that it is definitely still acceptable for people hoping that the timing works out well, that they go ahead and use those conventional means. But look, do whatever superstitious stuff you want, like candles, devotional candles to the OBGYN who is nameless, who will deliver this kid. Do whatever feels right.
Yeah. Again, it can be all over the place. I've had three kids myself. One was punctual, like day of. One, he was 5 days early. And then my daughter was 11 days late. She just decided to hang out for a while. It can be all over the place. And yeah, it's something that, again, I don't know whether they are going to try to medically induce or if they're just going to kind of leave it to the fates, especially this being their first child. But it's again something that we didn't really expect to ponder from a press conference, but it is something that's a reality. The one thing that I am concerned about, though, is the sleep deprivation factor and what that's going to do. I
Uh huh.
remember Nick Lima became a new father when he was with the team, and he talked about just his wife doing everything, which is kind of a more traditional slash unfair way to do things. I don't feel like Gallagher is built the same way. I feel like he will want to chip in, help with things, help with middle of the night diaper changes and things like that. And that is going to screw up the sleep schedule.
Yeah, John being the attested fittest guy on the team is in his favor. He may handle the rigors of it better than others, but I don't know. I think that being said, the guy is fit enough to be able to deal with and young enough to deal with some of the tiredness from losing
Mhm.
sleep. What it's going to really come down to is how soon it actually happens. I think that's the biggest thing. So if it goes with the West trend of on time, 5 days early, 11 days late, closer to dead on. That is unfortunate timing. So what I am hoping is that the Gallaghers buck that trend and just go ahead and get some of the sleep deprivation out of the way now, and then deal with some of the jet lag of hopping on an international flight to Toronto and coming back.
We know that Austin FC in their training facility has an altitude room because we've been talking about that with Danny Pereira, and we know that it goes to 10,000 feet. He's playing an international game this week, which is going to be played at 13,500 feet. So, what I'm wondering is, out of all the things, considering the new fathers, do they have a sleep deprivation room in the training facility?
I mean, I feel like that room is anywhere that more than two of the players are at any given time, based on
That's a good point.
when it used to be the joke that during the press conferences that was the time for the leaf blowers and the construction, but now
Mhm.
it's time for the club, loud music, people having a good time, talking, chatting it up, slamming basketballs into the side of the wall.
During
I
press conferences.
During press conferences, yeah, I feel like he's getting acclimated to that level of din thanks to
Mhm.
his own teammates, which it's very generous of them, if you ask me.
So, what you're saying is it's one big indoor outdoor sleep deprivation room.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, hurry up, shut up, hurry up, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies. We're back, and we're recording strangely on Monday because things happen. But we are here. We are here to talk about two matches, one that was happy, one that was not happy, and just the ongoing kind of playoff situation and other things that are concerning us at the moment. So, of course, I'm Phil West. I'm here with Moisés Chiullan. Moisés, how you doing today?
Good. I did a whole lot of math and wrote about 4,000 words that I knew were going to almost immediately be irrelevant. And unfortunately for the team, they were almost immediately irrelevant in the way that leads to something I was tentatively calling the nightmare timeline, where
Mhm.
all the teams surrounding Austin in the table started picking up points, but Austin doesn't,
Right.
which makes it real hard to get out of 10th place.
Yeah, so we are in the nightmare timeline right now, is what you're saying. That
Absolutely.
tracks. Given, yeah, again, it looked like things were going decently. Dallas lost Colorado, so that kind of was something that worked in Austin's favor. But then Houston, Portland, Minnesota all won, not a thing that we wanted to see. And then all of a sudden, there is a bit of a logjam above Austin in the table. You've got three teams on 40 points between sixth and eighth place, one of them being Seattle, who lost to Portland. Then you have Minnesota at 36 points, and you have Austin in 10th at 34. So, again, jumping Minnesota is probably the easiest way for them to get into the playoffs at this point, if they can do that. But Minnesota does have a little bit of an easier schedule than Austin headed down the stretch. And then, of course, that is based on Austin winning games. And again, this might be their kind of only route because with 7 games left, making up 2 points, sure, that's doable. Making up 6 points, that is considerably less doable.
Yeah, looking at the upcoming fixtures, the stuff that would help, it would be great if Vancouver would follow the trend and beat another Texas team in Dallas this week during the break. It would be great once the break is over for Seattle to beat Minnesota, Colorado to beat
Mhm.
Portland. Actually, at this point, it's almost okay for Portland to break away as
Mhm.
long as somebody is stagnating, and feel like if we're looking at focusing on who has the more likely lousy next few fixtures, it's a toss up between Minnesota and Dallas, because right after Minnesota have St. Louis, who are not in a particularly great place in the table, but St. Louis hate Minnesota, it'll do something. Dallas has RSL the next fixture, so it's like you want Dallas to do poorly for regular reasons, and you want Dallas to do poorly because they're about to face a murderer's row of opponents. Because right after
Right.
RSL on the weekend, they have LAFC after Austin goes out to LA on the 18th. I feel like the theoretically resurgent SKC is going to take it to Minnesota on the 21st, when
Mhm.
hopefully Austin returning at home thoroughly trounces Houston. Yeah, September could go well for Austin in results that they don't control at all. The
Yeah.
question is, can it go well in results they do have some control over?
Yeah. And the other factor here, of course, is Houston. Their next
Yeah.
five, they play LAFC, who they just beat, and that's a home game. And then they also host RSL. Then they host, wow, they're hosting a lot. They
Uh-huh.
host Vancouver. And then, of course, they travel to Austin and then they travel to the Sounders. So there is a possibility that Houston could have a bad 5 game stretch here. And if Austin
Mhm.
can beat Houston, which is the next home game for Austin, which is September 21st, then that certainly helps. So maybe that's a team to target. Normally, you would root against Houston anyway, but if you are invested in Austin making the playoffs, you might want to root for Houston to fail a little bit harder than you
Yeah.
normally would.
In terms of those teams that it would be best to have bad results.
Mhm.
Houston ending the month against Seattle, not great for them. Dallas
No.
ending the month against Orlando, not great for them. So it could be that the Texas teams open up a bit of a hole still. Minnesota ends the month against Colorado, which if they keep it up, that could be very helpful. I think you're right that the watching the Minnesota fixtures is important. I think as much as the last day of August and first day of September fixtures affected things, didn't affect things. It didn't matter whether Galaxy or St. Louis won, but who thought St. Louis was going to win that? The weird thing is, as immediately quote unquote irrelevant as I would think that my 4,000 word thought exercise would be, a lot of the principles are still 100% set
Yep.
because one game is only going to change so much when it comes to that math. But
Mhm.
if the next 2 games, if Houston beats LAFC again, if
Mhm.
Dallas beat Vancouver, that's not good. If on the 14th Houston beats RSL somehow, that's real not good. If St. Louis don't beat Minnesota, also not good. That's to the doom and gloom. I think is something that everybody was going to feel no matter what if they came back from the League's Cup break to a loss like they did. There's the locker room factor where I was in the locker room and had never seen it that low, not
Mhm.
having the context of what you were in the press conference experiencing, which was Wolf saying 6 or 7 of his players, it's their fault. There was apparently literally nothing wrong with the tactics. 1000% nothing wrong with the tactics.
Mhm.
It was all down to players being bad and should feel bad for doing bad. And there were looks on faces and vibes from people that I have never seen against some of the worst losses earlier in the season that
Okay.
to me
Yeah.
were categorically worse than this. And whether it was them overthinking a loss or not, I could not square how precisely the vibes were so badly off. Um, Based on
I
that game and the fact that there is still a path to the playoffs. These
Yeah.
people were acting like they were completely already eliminated from the
Mhm.
playoffs.
Yeah.
And I feel like that post game coach talk did not go terribly well.
Yeah. The thing is, I think that this was a pretty important game because now they're seeing what they're up against. And that's the thing, like the results were still transpiring when the final whistle happened and when they got to the locker room, things were still okay results wise. Houston was only up 1-0, I think, at that point. Portland and Seattle were tied. San Jose tied it up with Minnesota during the press conference. I think at one point, like Josh had said that they're in a good place. They're like at the line or above it. And at that point they were not. They were 10th. So I shook my head and then Colby pulled that up to look at it. So yeah, I think there's a sense that okay, this is one of the last home games. This is one that we had to get at least some kind of result out of. And I think maybe the way that the loss actually happened was maybe deflating. Maybe there was this realization. Again, we saw in 2023, there was an outside looking in on the playoffs towards the end of the season, and there were some losses down the stretch that really ratcheted them down in terms of their chances for making it. And I feel like this is one of those games. And I think maybe there's a little bit of deja vu for the people who are returning from last year.
Yeah, the energy in the fan base could not be more, well, at least we've gotten used to this.
Yeah. A
Um,
lot of booing. A
A
lot of booing
lot of
after that
booing.
match.
A lot of booing after that match.
Maybe they didn't like
And
the ref. Maybe they didn't
I,
like the performance.
I don't think they liked the ref. I don't think they liked the performance either. There were cross sentiments I heard and saw about who was the worst player and who didn't do the most. We'll get into this in a bit, but I think
Yep.
there are some weird dynamics at play. Driussi working as a false nine worked once, and it's now
Mhm.
not worked twice.
Yeah, and I asked Josh about that right off. I don't think that's the best place to deploy him. Again, it's the same problem that we've talked about with him, that he is a second striker in a one striker system. He's best utilized making late runs, triangles from wide playmakers. They figured out ways to do that in 22. They haven't really done that since. And we're going to talk about Driussi in a little bit and just where his numbers are at. About 6 weeks ago, I had asked the question, are we witnessing Driussi's decline in real time? And we're going to circle back to that with just a little bit more data that we've accumulated over the last few, in particular, regular season games. Of course, he did get a goal and assist in a game in Leagues Cup, which was nice to see, but definitely some concern areas there. But let's real quick, before we get into dire gloom and doom, I just want to say that I really enjoyed Bucharest's goal in the Nashville game. So
Yeah.
if we want to talk a little bit about
Oh
good things
yeah.
that we saw there, good feelings that we
Let's
had from that game, and then
do.
we'll dive
Let's
into
talk.
the doom.
Let's talk about that Nashville game. Let's.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember laughter? Because that's I love deploying that line strategically, and boy, do I
Uh,
need it now,
yep.
more than most times. That Nashville game, I'm real happy for the traveling fans that went out to that
Mhm.
game who had a good time. A small handful of them got to chug beers with a "see you in the playoffs" head coach after the game. It was the days of wine and roses, Phil. Remember when things were good, when the birds sang and the sky was blue and the sun shone outside? Um,
It's just going to be this up and down for the next 7 weeks, isn't it?
Look at that result, take it back to
Mhm.
2022, and tell those fans that Austin was going to get a clean sheet against Nashville in Nashville. I feel like, as down as everybody deservedly should feel after Saturday night, Nashville only happened a week ago. These
Mhm.
guys were capable of that. It's real easy to say this is definitely all the players' fault. I feel like that was a case of coach v. coach, Wolf versus
Mhm.
Callahan, a more mature, riper fruit from the Berhalter tree, stepped on a
Mhm.
more recent, unripe green banana that just was not quite there. That to me was a case of Callahan thinking he knew what he was getting into and trying to make some adjustments. As much as Josh seems to think that the players were bad and should feel bad following the Vancouver game, Callahan's players were bad and should feel bad from their
Mhm.
game against Austin.
Yeah, that's not a good team.
It is not a good team. It's not responsive, bad in the transition, is all over the place. Although
Although pretty good in the first 75 seconds. And
pretty good for, I'd say, 75. I'd go so far as to say 85 seconds, Phil. Those golden first 100 seconds of the game looked real scary. All of a
Mhm.
sudden, Austin turned it around, but that is not how you want to start a match. If any.
Saving a PK though, and then
Hmm.
getting a goal in what was a really
Hmm.
weird first half, and then obviously Bukari at the end there sealing it. Again, when we talked to him post match, he was talking about envisioning it, essentially knowing that he had to finish once he was able to get the ball cleanly from Sejic. Saw Willis out there, what Joe Willis was doing out so far in front of his goal, I am not quite sure, but it worked out definitively well for Austin. So again, in that game, you had some individual players that were really stepping up in key moments, and then you had a team that was generally going toe to toe with their opponent the whole way through on the road, which to me was impressive. Of course, again, it's Nashville. It's not a great team.
Yeah.
They're going to obviously be going through some changes. They're having some hard luck. You could argue in similar ways that Austin is, in terms of, in particular, designated player kind of underperforming. But at the same time, it is on the road. It's not the easiest place to play, even though, as we mentioned, maybe a little bit more empty than we might expect that stadium to be.
Yeah. Remember when they said they'd have no trouble filling a 30,000 seat stadium on a regular basis? And
Well,
now, like, all they had to do
yeah.
was, like, they didn't even have a big drop off in form before that place started being real tough to fill. It was still patchy in the early days of it being open, but boy, when that performance really dropped off, turns out that Tennessee has other professional sports teams for people to care about. And
Football season's about to kick in, so there's that.
definitely affected attendance across the league this weekend. Let's be real. A lot of Americans are still statistically much bigger fans of American football than
Mhm.
European/world football. To me, it's world football. People like to say, oh, it's just Europeans. I'm like, no, man, it's the rest of the world. For me, another thing, I don't remember where I heard it. Maybe I don't remember it for a reason, or maybe I don't remember it because, I just don't remember. It's been a long weekend. Word was that Bookery went into this game very focused to the
Mhm.
point that he didn't want to go out for dinner before the game. The other guys went out for dinner, and he was like, "No, I'm here to play. I need to stay focused. I need to stay at the hotel. I need to meditate or something."
Hmm.
And we saw that level of focus on the field in that
Mhm.
Nashville
Yeah.
game. I would argue that it carried over to the home game against Vancouver. That guy is locked in. He is locked in. He is cool headed. He is focused on football. Like in the post match presser, he said that he doesn't want to leave the training ground when it's time for everybody to leave. He just loves the work. He's in full workaholic mode. And I don't think it's unhealthy at all. I think it's very healthy. He has the advantage that some of these other guys do not have of having some pretty singular focus. He's still new to the area. Mikkel Dessler, they worked out his wife's visa paperwork. She's here. They're happy. I feel like those two guys are pretty uniquely locked in, not as hung up on having been around for as long as the other guys have and thinking
Mhm.
about certain results certain ways and performance against certain
Right.
teams. These two guys don't have any of that kind of history. They don't have any of that kind of, oh, great, it's Vancouver again with the much better coach than we have. Oh, man. With Nashville, for some of those guys, that was a really important win because, hey, they finally beat Nashville. Hey,
Right. Right.
look at that. Look at us. All right. All right. We're good. We're good. We know what we're doing. And for Osman and Mikel, it was all right, cool. This team can do it. This team is good. Let's keep going. Yeah, I feel like the most that can be done to get people's heads back into how well that game went, despite I far more trained eyes than mine, feel like Driussi deserved that goal. I feel like Driussi maybe deserved that goal. How would things be different mentality wise had Driussi gotten that goal going into the Vancouver game? He does not tend to do well when he is on a goal drought.
Yeah.
It's not great, and it's difficult for him to kickstart the thing with no gas.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna get to that in a sec. Just yeah, let's open up talking about Vancouver. Of course, 1-0 loss on Saturday. Pedro Vite with the only goal of the game around minute 70. Obviously, Wolf made some subs, tried to go ultra offensive. That didn't produce any goals, nor did it produce any shots on target. They had no shots on target in this game again, which is a really tough way to win a game of soccer. So, just what did you see? Just general concerns or specific concerns from that match?
With these new pieces, these new players that are very good and very solid contributors, the ones who have hit the field, Svatok not being one of them, even though he was on the team sheet, this was suddenly a regression to what it was like before those guys got here with no
Yeah.
shots on target. How many? I don't have the figure at hand. You might know off the top of your head. How many of those other games with no shots on target have we seen this season from Austin? Whatever the number is, too many. Does not feel good. Does not feel right. Goals change games, but it's difficult to score goals when you don't have shots on target. You can't just hope for gravity to momentarily adjust and something to randomly go in on the side of Giassi Zardes' head. That to me is really the big concern. Wolf will say things about how you got to take the right shots and who cares how many shots we've got if they're bad shots. Everything that contributes to them not having shots on goal, to me, somebody who thinks that XG is an interesting thought exercise that does apply, and to the very solid points that you raised recently in an article, it has its uses, it has its purposes. It is not the end all be all. Shots on goal being zero pretty universally is a bad sign of a lot of things being wrong simultaneously. I don't think it's a directly causal relationship where you can say that it means that these 6 things are busted. It just so happens that 6 other things are busted. What's going on with the passing? Why does Usman Bukhari feel like the only player on the field when he breaks away and gets way upfield with the ball after time, and not due to any, to me, focused mistake on his part? There's nobody ready to receive the ball or help him maintain possession on the same side of the field the way that there was for John Gallagher multiple times. I don't know if there is some sort of dynamic at play where he's seen as the new DP. I don't want to believe that there is some sort of fracture that is just what he represents, which is not just the salary, but the player number that Driussi's buddy from Argentina had scant weeks ago. I don't want to think that it's that. The vibes at practice in the locker room that we've seen has been pretty jovial, pretty friendly overall. But Osman is not, he's not an outsized personality. He's not super, he's actually pretty shy. And that's
Yeah.
something that we
Yeah.
saw at the player debut event. He is not a fun party guy.
Yeah.
He seems like a very nice, very soft spoken, very keeps to himself. He's a football nerd. He is 1,000% a football nerd. And yeah, there are other football nerds in there, but this is the one who really wants to make sure that his homework is completely correct before handing it in. This is a team of a lot of bad boys who it's not just about the way that they dress or something, but like all of these guys love their Louis Vuitton. All these guys know how to be stylish and show up like they're showing up to the club when they show up to a game. But Osman, if there has been any difficulty in him integrating, it's that he doesn't have that same kind of boisterous personality that a bunch of these guys have. That's honestly the biggest note of concern that I saw coming out of this game is play on the field reflecting the way that the kids play at recess. That's the thing that stuck out to me above everything was run after run. And saw people on social media, heard people in Twitter spaces blaming him for the fact that his teammates didn't have his back in various places. And my eyes can only be in so many places at once. It's difficult for me to say categorically that he was getting frozen out, or maybe there was no motivation and it just was bad link up play. Is it a
Yeah.
problem with the midfield? Ring was making like hero runs to try to get back and do defensive work right after taking corner kicks. So at least that part of the midfield, could Alex Ring do more? I'm sure. Yes. Every player can always do more. That is an easy thing to say about literally any player, even when they have an incredible game. Did Alex Ring have an incredible game? No. Did he keep his 5 guys who were on yellow card suspension watch off of yellow card suspension? Yes. Points to the captain for that I don't know he's necessarily getting credit for. They're going toward Toronto without anybody suspended, which was a genuine concern. And when 2 of those people are Driussi and Brendan Hines-Ike, and then another one's John Gallagher, that was important. But when everybody's got to be on their best behavior, were they being so cautious to avoid that at the hazard of making the plays that they needed to be able to get the shots on goal? That's where my head has been, Phil. I don't know about you, but that's the general, that's what was worrying me the most, aside from the ref who died, was also not terribly fond of.
Yeah. And was not terribly fond of Dessler, which Dessler didn't want to talk about. He says he doesn't talk about the reffing, but it did feel like there was, that was a factor in the game. So Matt Doyle had an interesting stat. He said the Verde are dead last in passing sequences that end in a shot per game. That's 9.0. And he says an astonishing 20% lower than 28th place Montreal. So I think, again, that's a concern for me. Again, with Bukhari, you saw him progressing the ball. You saw his speed on display that continues to impress. We saw a lot of crosses that went into their goalkeeper's hands here and there. We saw some that if they'd been a little bit more on target, they could have been chances. But again, this kind of idea of running and crossing, we were frustrated when Rigoni was doing it. And I think Bucari does it better, but I still am questioning, wouldn't it make more sense for him to do a little bit more one-on-one take-ons, use his speed, use his ability with the ball, and get past people that way rather than just Popel crosses into the box. Again,
it crosses into the state of hope.
Yeah, exactly. Is it the coaching? Is that what Wolf is telling him to do? Or is that just instinctively who he is? And I haven't seen enough of him to know at this point. Is this part of his game and is this what he does normally? Or is this kind of emphasis in terms of this kind of idea of the way that Austin plays and should play, which again, when you have Driussi as your 9, when you don't have somebody occupying center backs in the same way, that again, for all we might worry about with Zardes, at least Zardes can do that kind of work and can keep center backs busy. We did see at one point Zardes and Rubio come into the game, but wasn't really able to do anything at that stage. Again, when they came in, I recognized what Wolf was doing in terms of, oh, this is a really risky sort of offensive move. This is dice rolling that we normally don't see from him. Usually we, at the end of games, we'll see the opposite. We'll see an extra center back come on because they're trying to preserve a lead or a draw when those things happen. And that's just conventionally what he'll do at that point. That's what he says the game state calls for. And so to see this kind of move where Julio Cascante is your only center back for the late stages of the game, only down 1 goal, that's curious to me. But so that was a concern for me, is just to see, okay, we tried this kind of big dice roll and this is what we have offensively, and this is how well it didn't work.
I feel like if that roll of the dice had happened maybe 20 minutes earlier, it would have made a pretty solid, decisive difference.
Yeah.
Cascante comes on and the goal gets scored. Look, I don't have stats to back me up. I don't have some sort of hate on for Julio Cascante. I think he's a very nice guy. I think he's a better player than some people think he is. But it feels like a number of times this season, Julio Cascante comes on, a goal gets scored. Is it then assigned to blame on somebody else? Occasionally, including this time. But there is something about the back line that opens up when he shows up that does not feel good. And I can't assign individual blame to him for the goal going in, but there is something about the backline dynamic that, and last thing I want to do is praise Josh in ways that will have people wanting my head. I feel some solid reasoning as to why Heinzike and Hedges have been so regularly paired there in the center back position. And it's because those things have not happened as much when they've been back there. Granted, has Heinzike occasionally gotten things into the danger zone? Absolutely. But also that's just being a center back. But it hasn't felt like as constant of a worry as people got to feel once Cascante came back from injury last season, where things just went through like Swiss cheese. An uncharacteristic, trying to push forward the attack change from Josh. It felt to me like Sartini was anticipating it. That once they went up a goal, that he could expect Wolf was going to do something like that. And his defenders just didn't let anything in. And I mentioned to you at a certain point, I saw that Sartini was just like sitting on the concrete divider railing, whatever you call it, just sitting back and had one of his assistants pushed up top. Do we call that the Sartini low block or what? the Sartini maneuver, the Sartini position? He was wearing a Diego Maradona like pop art style t-shirt, a roomy one. The most enjoyable thing about watching this Austin game was watching a really solid coach go coach v coach very effectively. And I think it comes down to as much work as the Austin technical staff goes into watching film, anticipating things. You had this pegged as a winnable match. It was one that I put in my controversial and knew that I was going to be proven wrong wouldn't it be great if they went on a 5-game win streak? It would have been great. But I think that this fixture was more challenging for them than anybody gave it credit for. I felt like coming off of the energy of the Pumas and Monterrey wins and a theoretical Nashville win, I thought it was much more winnable because of that.
Yeah.
But I actually, I think overall, my vibe on this was that it was actually going to be harder to win than the Toronto game, harder to win than the LFC away game because of the fixture congestion, because of the focus scattering that LAFC is going to have going on.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm not saying Josh threw the LAFC Leagues Cup game, but he definitely did not feel like it was as essential to win than the one that his job is on the line to win. For me, the underestimation of the coach in Vanni Sartini was the biggest miscalculation. And I feel like Josh went into this game overconfident. I think the team went into this
Maybe.
game
Yeah.
overconfident too.
Yeah. And you listen to Josh, and Josh still thinks that LAFC Leagues Cup game was a good game for the team, even though they got countered on twice and lost, which is puzzling. Again, there's a lot of puzzling things from this. Like, why have we not seen Svatok play a minute yet? Why do we persist in having Driussi play the 9 when that's not his natural position? I think it's really important for Wolf at this point to get Ring and Pereira and Owen all on the field at the same time in the midfield. But when you do that, yeah, you can only play Driussi at the wing or up top at that point, and they have wingers. Why we haven't seen Obrian paired with Bucari to the extent that we were expecting once Bucari got signed. There's just some puzzling choices that are happening here, and we don't really get to see much in the way of self-analysis that Wolf's doing. There's a little bit here and there sprinkled into his answers, but a lot of it still is execution from the players. That's what he seems to be pegging it on. And yeah, that's the thing. Like, we weren't privy to whatever kind of post-match talk Wolf had with the team, but again, yeah, I assume that it was not great given kind of the reactions and the weirdness of the locker room. It could just be, again, like we talked about before, this idea that they know that this was 3 points that they had to have to get to the playoffs, and it becomes much tougher now, and they're maybe seeing writing on the wall a little bit. But yeah, I have so many kind of questions circulating as a result of this match. Whereas after the Nashville match, it was this idea of, oh, if they play like this and they have these individual moments of greatness from some players who are really talented, then maybe they can string some wins and draws together and get here.
A couple things come to mind as you say that stuff. I've mentioned to you that part of where my thinking is on Obrian is that when he joined the team, his two biggest issues were staying on side and giving the ball away when he was too heavily defended in the interest of
Yeah.
maintaining possession. And that's continued to be an issue, even though he's fixed the offside issue. For me, there's that. And there's the fact that when it comes to cross field connecting, Gallagher and Bucari are really quite good at it. And Gallagher, despite the protestations of some, I feel is so much more suited to being in an attacking position than he
Right.
filling in as backup to the backup of the right back.
But then you had this kind of weird thing going on in the game where he was deployed as a winger. He was supposed to be playing up top, and then was still shifting to become a left back and a back 5 at points. And despite that, and I know Alex from the We Are Austin crew, like, he was talking about, oh, they're so focused on keeping this kind of tight defensive shape that they're gonna leave some holes. And on the Gald goal that got disallowed, and then the actual goal where, again, it was Dessler trying to clear it, bounced off Pereira, it pinballed around, but Vite popped up in space where he was able to shoot. There were these pockets throughout the game. You had either on the left side, on Austin's right side defending, you either had Gald or Raposo who were popping up open. You had Dessler occupied with one. Wolf attributed that to Bucari not tracking back as he should have defensively, but it also seemed like maybe they needed to rotate and communicate more. And then when you go to a system where Israeli center back late in the game, that makes it even tougher. Luckily, there wasn't more damage and they didn't suffer more, goal differential hits from that. But it's all of this is really puzzling. And I don't know. why
Mm.
this is all happening. When this team has shown like just a month ago that they can be really pragmatic and defend tightly in spots and pick spots to counter, and it works really well for them. Like, it's not a pretty way to play soccer, but it's real effective. LAFC does it to some degree. Like this season, you've seen it to good effect. It's a way to win in MLS, and you can do that.
I mean, we keep talking about central defense. Let's talk about the mystery on the Svatok Express, because he was
Mhm.
on the team sheet as a sub. Did you
Yeah.
actually see him in the stadium? I didn't see him in the locker room after the game, and
Mhm.
I didn't remember seeing him at training on Thursday,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
I could be wrong, and occasionally I mistake him with Stephen Cleveland from a distance, especially when they're in training gear, um, because they sometimes blend together. But what's going on?
I don't know. Yeah, I have
What
no idea.
what is going on? There are so many more concerning things at the front of people's minds
Mhm.
than that, but I feel like if there are concerns and issues with goals getting let in, if literally the difference, if that game had been a draw, Phil, do you think that the vibes would be remotely this off? I mean, off, not, not a win. Everybody wouldn't be
Right.
thrilled and like screaming and crying in the streets with joy.
But it's a home point against a good team at that point,
Yeah.
and it moves you a little bit closer. Again, with the results, what that would have done would have been moved them to 35 instead of 34, and they'd still be a point behind Minnesota. But at least there's that idea that, yeah, you are at least getting something out of your home matches. They really could have used the 3 points in that game. Again, just because I think it's going to be tougher to find out. You can still get to 46 points beating Toronto,
Yeah.
Houston, Portland, and Colorado. And that's not out of the question the way that they played at points this year, but it's been so inconsistent. And again, if you only get 3 of those 4 games and you're on 43 points, you're going to need help. And I just already you have teams in 6th to 8th place who are on 40. So one more win and they get to that place where Austin's going to need 3 wins to get to the exact same 43 total. So I'm getting more and more concerned about their playoff chances with this loss.
Yeah. You don't even mention the Galaxy game because I think the best anybody anticipates from that is maybe they get a road point. Maybe.
Mhm.
It the winnowing path for where they're going to pick up points and the steepness of the hill to climb is getting to be like that 13,000-foot climb that Danny's about to make.
Yeah.
Where it's like the room only goes to 10K. Oh boy.
Right. It's not inconceivable to say they beat Toronto, Houston, Portland, and Colorado. But again, you're leaving it to the last day. They're probably going to need help at that point. I think 46 is generally pretty solid, but it's again, it's a little dicey. And definitely 43 is not any kind of guarantee. It gets you there in some cases, but it's a tricky
Yeah.
place to be.
My exercise in 4,200 words of madness, a part of what I was getting at was actually specifically that point total you mentioned, 43.
Yeah.
43 is workable, but highly contingent on literally everything else that surrounds it. Now that so many teams are at 40, that makes 43 radically more dangerous. That's what has taken us into the nightmare timeline. The chaos timeline will be if Austin's boat rises just a little bit and everybody is still hovering right around 40,
Mhm.
where the last 2 fixtures of the season mean literally everything.
Last season, Portland missed playoffs on 43 points in 10th place.
Yeah.
44 was where the line was in 2022. Let me look real quick. Oh, yeah. 43 was the line in 2022. But actually, if they had 9 teams in the playoffs, the line would have been 43.
Oh, I
The
just
line
thought
was
it
at 7, so RSL got 47.
am I remembering something superstitious right now, or is the number on the back of the no comply collab kit 43?
Yeah, it
Oh
is.
no. Oh
Yeah, in
no.
22 actually. Yeah, in 22 also. Yeah, Vancouver got in or would have gotten into 9th with 43. Colorado also at 43, and they were on 10th and lost the wins tiebreakers. That's what would have gotten Vancouver in had they been at 9 teams in 22, which again, 9 teams is a lot, probably too many. So
Yeah.
that's something that we gotta factor in. Okay, I did want to hit one thing real quick before, and I know there was something you wanted to talk about too. So let's get to these last 2 little tidbits. And again, this is just something that's worrying me from this game and something that I think continues to be a worry. So we talked about Driussi's performance, and 6 weeks ago, right before Leagues Cups break, when we were thinking about just Driussi and where his season's been and being stuck on 5 league goals. He hadn't scored in 7 league matches before that. So his last goal was May 18th versus SKC. He did get a goal and an assist in one of the Leagues Cup matches, but league-wise, that's still his last goal. His last assist was June 19th against LAFC. So you can either couch it this way. You can say he scored 1 goal and 1 assist in his last 11 matches, or a little more cynically, you can say 0 goals and 1 assist in his last 10 league matches, right? Yeah, he's had only 7 shots on target in those 10 games. 7 games out of those 10, he's had 2 shots, not shots on goal, but shots or less. Some of those games he's had 0, of course, including Saturday night, because nobody had a shot on goal. And yeah, just it's in 2022, by contrast, like he scored in 19 of 34 matches. And his longest scoreless streak of that season was 3. So that's concerning. And I don't think playing him at the 9 really helps with this as much as Wolf might think that it does, or at least wanted to get him on the field, wanted to get all those other midfielders on the field, and that's a way to do it.
I hesitate to even touch the highly electrified third rail of this, but they moved Driussi in the offseason.
Yeah, there's rumors that are floating around right now. He's on a big salary.
It's reliable to other rumors out of Brazil.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
This team that can barely afford Sebastián Driussi are going to roll for it.
That's the thing. Yeah, just where the money is, what the transfer fee would be, what Austin would be looking to get back, what the salary is. That's going to be tough. There's European interest. I could see one of those teams pulling it off, but given the season he's had, I wonder if there's going to be a lot of that interest. If people say, oh, he just needs to change the scenery, he needs to be a second striker again, he's got the talent, and whether Driussi is going to want to move at that point, that's another question in the equation. But I could see it happening, and I could see Roto trying to go with a more traditional 10 and a more traditional 9 if you open up that DP spot, and then Ring is already bought down right now. So that would leave Bukri as the only designated player heading into 24 season, where you'd have to try to find 2 DPs in the winter window, or again, just 1 DP and then go with U22s. Although, yeah, I think the 2 and 4 this year was just to get the money needed, the fake money needed to buy Ring down. So I think that's where a lot of that went. Maybe in some other salaries. But yeah, maybe that could be, I don't see, whereas like 22, it thought unthinkable that you would move Driussi. I could see some high profile moves, right? I could see a team taking a flyer on Danny and them arriving at a number that would work. Or again, we had those rumors at the start of the season where Danny might be moved within the league. And if there's enough fake or real money that comes back that way, maybe that's also a possibility. I don't know. It's an interesting query right now.
Yeah, this international call up, I think, will be interesting to see if Danny gets the opportunity to show up and show out. That definitely does something when it comes to being able to deal him to Europe, for example, as he has said that he wants to. He's got his paperwork in order. He can. There are other guys not getting minutes. Julio Cascante is one of them. I think that there's still there's a little bit of time left for him to be dealt outside of the league if they found somebody that wanted him, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen.
I've been floating Saprissa for a while based on nothing other than he's Costa Rican, and that's their dominant Costa Rican team. And
there you go.
Kendall Waston's 36, so I don't know how many years he has, and he could be an interesting player for them. But again, yeah, we already know from what Josh has said that they're only going to carry 4 center backs on any given roster, even though they have 5 who all ostensibly could play. Although we don't know if Svatok can play now. We don't know what's going on there. But there's always going to be a center back that's left off that match day 20. And it was Väisänen last time, and it was Cascante the time before that. And I think that's going to be the way that it's going to be through the end of the season. And you'll be able to tell whoever wasn't good at practice in the week based on that. And yeah, I mean, at this point, moving a center back seems like that's a move that Austin should probably do if the coach is not going to use 5 center backs in that way, other than to keep that crew more competitive. And because Conte, I think, is maybe the only one that you could move right now, given where the windows are, if there's that opportunity. But we'll know that this week.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we, while talking about totally non uncomfortable things at all, do we want to get into this
Okay.
last bit?
Sure. Yeah. Because again, this was a weird kind of holdover from
Uh
the
huh.
Nashville game, and it delayed things considerably in the first half of that game, and we weren't quite sure what was going on. And now, like, more information has trickled out, and there's more maybe subtext that you could read into things. Do you want to set up the what
Yeah.
we're to embark on?
So recently arrived Australian international Mr. Yazbek said something.
Yeah, it's a
And
U22, remember, right? So a younger
yeah,
player.
yeah, he's a young guy, new to the league, said something. It held up play for an enormous amount of time, leading to an enormous amount of stoppage that some Nashville fans would have you believe was an unfair advantage and the fix was in and the whole game was held up and they just weren't allowed to play. But also, have they seen their
Right.
team recently?
And again, the solution for that, Yazbek was having a pretty good game up to that
Yeah.
point, but the solution, rather than getting sent off or whatever, it was that Nashville, quote unquote, voluntarily subbed Yazbek off and put on Jonathan Perez, who's another good young player, and he had a different kind of effect on the game, but it wasn't necessarily that they had diminished their quality, but it definitely changed the makeup of what they were doing. And Austin did score pretty soon after that change. So you could say that it was disruptive. But again, it was something where I think the course of action that was deemed best given the situation is that he be taken off the field. And so he
Yeah.
was. And now I believe there's a suspension, and he's doing a restorative practices program, which
Hmm.
is something that happens in MLS when a player steps into an offensive language zone.
Yeah.
So it's probably not just the simple swear word that is rumored to have been
Yeah.
said,
The rumor that
which
got spread around
is,
very
yeah.
quickly to me felt like it got seeded by somebody who wanted to try to diminish the severity of what actually got said or just try to
Hmm.
push it off, knowing that the league is very protective of things like this. Do we actually
Yeah.
know what got Bruce Arena suspended? No, but we know that Kalen Kyle then got suspended for speculating about speculation she had heard about it
Right,
on
right.
MLS
Yeah.
Season Pass. We know that the league protects what is actually said in a situation like this, apparently better than the Secret Service protects presidential candidates. They will not let it get out officially. And so rumor rules the day, and the rumor that got out was all about see you next Tuesday. And oh, it's just whatever, Americans need to get over themselves and it's not that big of a deal. Australians entered the chat, as it were, and said, "No, it really was not that bad. Gosh, that's what Americans get offended over."
Mhm.
Saying that word does not create that kind of facial reaction from Danny Pereira and Owen Wolf.
Yeah.
Whichever one of the two of them something got said to, whatever it
Mhm.
was that was said, it wasn't just that word. So either that word was involved and we're lacking the rest of the context, or that word was involved and the additional context includes other things or another thing from the banned word list. And both of these guys are people of color. Owen's mom's Filipino. He's half
Mhm.
Filipino. Um,
Yeah.
Australians, not all Australians, I'll say, not all Australian. There is a propensity for anti Asian racism in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
There's a
something
fair bit
I'm
of Asian immigration there, right? So
a
that's,
huge amount. And it's something that I'm very keenly aware of having worked for Apple years ago, but things haven't changed that much. And
mhm.
I was working on a team that was insourcing their Australian New Zealand call center stuff to a massive facility here in Austin that does a ton of things. Long and the short of it is, I listened to and even participated in some test calls with loads of white Australians whose first words out of their mouths were, "Are you Asian? Are you Asian?" Because I want to
Mhm.
make sure that I'm calling Australia. And if you're Asian and I'm calling
Jeez.
Australia, transfer me to someone who speaks English.
Jeez.
And it is no small thing. And I'm not saying the whole country is racist, but
Mhm.
there is especially following the pandemic, there has been something of a revival of some
Mhm.
really virulently racist attitudes that you hear rugby players, you hear footballers in Australia using language that They get away with it in Australia. They're not going to get away with it in World Cups. They're not going to get away with it in other international leagues. I'm not saying that I have any sort of an inside source or something like that, but there was some sort of a reaction of shock,
Yeah.
which Danny and Owen have heard a lot of stuff. These are not guys who are just getting introduced
Right.
to racial slurs and curses. There was some other aspect that really was extraordinary. This isn't me, getting the back of the oversensitive Austin team or something like that. That didn't just happen. It was precipitated by something. And sure enough, an Australian reporter with solid credentials came out and said, "Oh no, I'm hearing that it was not just that one word, and he did bad, and he should feel bad, and he's going to learn from this."
I hope he learns from it. Yeah.
Uh,
And this reminds me of the Dante Van Zier situation last
Yeah.
year, where he had a racial slur directed at Jeremy Abobasi, who does a lot of Black Players for Change work and all that. And why we knew so much about that and why there was a redemption tour that Van Zier did on that afterwards is because Abobasi spoke up about here's what was said. You're noticing that Austin's very quiet about that. And that's, again, maybe how they're choosing to do things, how they're choosing to keep it in house. And again, I don't think it's like super healthy necessarily to speculate on this, but in the end, I'm ultimately heartened that the league isn't tolerating this and that action was taken. And
Yeah.
even though it was weird and disruptive, obviously this is something that you want to eradicate from the game. Certainly it plagues it in far too many places around the world. And I think it's good that MLS is taking a stance on this and that MLS is acting and something is being done. And again, hopefully he's young enough and a good enough guy to where he'll bounce back from this. He'll learn from this. But again, with the restorative practices, it's weird because again, like typically in those kind of things, the person who is affected is also being involved. And I don't know if we'll know that that's going to happen to whether it was Owen or Danny or both of them. Again, I get the feeling that we're not going to entirely know what happens. Maybe it'll come out later in the
Maybe.
aspect side of the equation, but I feel given the way that Austin operates, that it wouldn't come from the Austin side.
It wouldn't come from the Austin side, and I don't think Nashville wants what was actually said to get out. You said hopefully he's a good enough guy. Who gives a
swear word?
Like
swear word.
That guy. There's your curses that you wanted to be able to bleep. Here's the thing about restorative justice. They've got to show a willingness to change. He's not a good guy until he shows a willingness to change and to have learned that what he did was wrong. Not that he's sorry for being sorry, but that he did something wrong, that it was
swear word
up, and that it's something that he's got to make a turnaround from. And if he is coddled and protected and made to feel like, oh, it's the oversensitive league and their oversensitive rules, then no, he's not going to learn from it. Care if he does his chores early and goes to bed on time. If what he did was the Australian reporter's comment is to be taken at face value, something racial got said. Because that's what the list is. Curses don't stop a game dead like that.
Yeah. No.
It was pretty. Hold on, just let me talk, please. What precisely was said doesn't matter. What matters is whether this kid actually thinks that what he did was wrong, and if he pushes it, and if he doesn't do the work, then we will probably see another Van Zier kind of thing that happens down the line. This isn't the kind of thing that you say you're sorry and sign a piece of paper and it's necessarily done. And it's not something that I think should have the expectation of he screwed up one time. No, if you're a racist, you're a racist. And you've got to show actual interest in being accountable for it, not oops, I got caught. What do you mean that's a problem in this league? That's what it comes down to. It's not something that, like, in the heat of the moment you deploy tactically to try to put your opponent off. I don't know. In the locker room, Danny talked to me about other stuff, talked about his international call up. If it was very specifically directed at Danny, I don't think he would have talked to anybody for anything. Owen, as usual, didn't want to talk to anybody or do anything other than get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. And I feel like part of Austin's reluctance to even entertain the notion of what was said getting out, because of all of this, every sensitivity attached to the fact that Owen is the coach's son. not to protect him, but because of the additional scrutiny that gets layered onto literally anything that has to do with the guy, which it's not his fault. It's not his dad's fault. It's just, that's how things are. That's why in the speculation game that isn't going to end about this, that's why I'm thinking that it was directed at Owen.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I can't see why Danny would have talked to literally anybody on Saturday night. So yeah, I don't know. The league always needs to do better about this kind of thing because it's a constantly moving target.
Yeah.
But I have to give them credit for actually doing something about it because other leagues like Serie A certainly don't.
Yeah.
And could care less.
Right.
So I think that in a rare case, I'll say I've got to give Major League Soccer some credit for actually doing something about this sort of thing and listening to the fans who don't want it tolerated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's the thing. Ultimately, yeah, I'm now like just curious as to what his motivation was, what his journey is. I don't know if we're going to get that or not. But again, I tend to be hopeful that people do want to do well with second chances. Again, racism, and like you were mentioning, can be very deeply rooted and can be very problematic, and you don't just you're racist and then you stop becoming racist necessarily. But I'm hopeful that again that he's still young enough, and hopefully he's in now with Nashville, and hopefully that's a good environment for him to maybe evolve and grow. But I don't know, based on some of the fans and stuff like
famously
that, it's
tolerant
hard.
Tennessee.
I know. Yeah, I know. But it's Nashville.
Yeah.
Like
It's Nashville.
Anyway.
It's Nashville. It's not the rest of Tennessee. It's not the rest of it all.
Taylor Swift is there.
Yeah.
So.
And the thing with a lot of these players is a lot of them grow up in very different environments where look, the support for trans Texans in the TIFO that went up on Saturday night, I'm sure the various players on Austin's team are not super down with that progressive of a message and have very particular thoughts about trans identity and so on. But to their credit, if they feel that way, we sure didn't hear about it. We sure didn't see them posting on social media about it.
I saw the march coming up to Hop Squad. So I filmed some of that and I posted it on Twitter, and I had to block someone who was made a comment that I didn't really like, which of course you can do on Twitter. So it's something you can do. All right. Yeah, can be indeed. All right. I think we're going to leave it there. So yeah, lots of, this is a heavy episode here, but it's that sort of time. And hopefully the international break is a reset. And again, it's pick your pathway. I mean, if you're rooting for abrupt change to happen, then Austin not making the playoffs makes that more likely. If you are just rooting for the team, want to see them do well, then obviously now that Austin needs to win some games, now that who are the teams that you want to see drop points down the stretch, right? So you can probably recite the list by now, but you can probably do that.
Broadcast schedule wise, do you think we get back together later this week as if there were a midweek availability, lacking a midweek availability, and talk about some fun, frivolous stuff that we don't
I could see doing
have
that,
any other place for, that kind of thing, and then we come back.
We'll see how the week shapes up. If there is not an emergency, then we will be recording emergency podcast. If there's an emergency, we'll probably wait a little bit to do that.
All right. Maybe people will get to hear about my counting to 11 formation.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We'll save that for next time. Yeah.
Okay,
that's the thing we'll do. All right.
Where's Phil? He usually starts this off.
He's teaching in San Antonio today. Colby, go ahead and start us off.